Welcome. Welcome to the virtual Vespers of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. I'm the Rev. Carrie Muller, co-consulting minister with the Reverend Dave Hunter, who is also our pianist and chalice lighter this evening. We light a tiny electronic flame, a symbol of our hopes for a community of freedom, justice, equity, and compassion. Ours is a legacy of freedom, of life and challenge, of oppression and want. Ours is a legacy of hope. It is our responsibility to remember the past, to care for each other, and to build the world that we want for our lives and for the lives of all. So here we are, still in a worsening pandemic, the fate of democracy uncertain, our lives constrained, between two holidays celebrating freedom. And freedom itself is a wide spectrum, ranging from the official but not realized end of slavery or incarceration, all the way to a narcissistic anarchy or a disregard for the rights and needs of anyone other than self. Somewhere in between is beloved community and interdependence as people help each other so that all may live their own lives in integrity and a gracious sufficiency. As we shall see, our celebrations of that ideal freedom are always incomplete and must include an element of aspiration. The legacy of slavery is ours today, no matter where in the world or in what conditions our ancestors lived while it was actively happening. Recently, I ran across two very powerful resources that helped to build a picture of those times, pieces unsuitable for our worship tonight, which yet ought to be part of our understanding. Carolyn Randall Williams provides in the New York Times in the Sunday Review. Here's the picture of her, the front page of the review section. She provides an intense, beautifully written, and harshly personal piece describing herself as a living monument to the evils of slavery. She is descended from Black female household help enslaved and white male rapists. It's well worth reading, and I will send it to you. And my daughter found for me a poem that had been deeply embedded in my childhood memory from a record that my parents had. They had it and they wore it out, called American Negro Poetry. A young Sidney Poitier preaches an antebellum sermon by Paul Laurence Dunbar. It is brilliantly written in dialect, which I have neither the right nor the talent to read aloud, but I have great empathy for that enslaved preacher who powerfully proclaims the right of every human being to be free, and then suddenly, mindful of his precarious situation, he attenuates the dangerous incitement in his words by adding, "I'm speaking about our freedom in a Biblistic sort of way." I'll send them to you both. Dave will play for us a hymn called "All Whose Boast It Is That Ye." Thank you, Dave. Well, Juneteenth has long been celebrated in the African-American community as Black Independence Day, for the 19th of June, 1865, when the news finally came to enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, that they had been legally free since the Emancipation Proclamation of almost 2.5 years earlier, and that they were now, with the end of the Confederacy, in fact free. This was cause for immediate and ongoing celebration. And it seems to me there's a sort of bitterly ironic parallel between the intentional delay in the news reaching the newly freed Blacks and the delay in white America's waking up to the realization that an insidious and often lethal racism still continues, that we need to be anti-racist, that we too ought to live as though the aspirational freedom of Juneteenth is worthy of ongoing defense and hopeful celebration by all Americans. Here are two excerpts from a recent series of New York Times articles about Juneteenth. And this is the section of the paper it came in. It's a whole front page saying freedom. This part is called Freedom is a Celebration. This is how we Juneteenth, as if it were a verb, by Gina Cherilis. What exactly does a Juneteenth celebration look like? For some, it's eating barbecue and shooting fireworks, gathering at a cookout and sipping on red drinks, a tradition that symbolizes perseverance and honors the blood that was shed of African Americans. For others, it's shopping only at Black-owned businesses, sharing history, or resting at home. This year, some will gather online for live video chats, which has become a new norm in the new coronavirus pandemic. She goes on, I'm of course condensing this. If you ask Attica Locke, a Houston-born, Los Angeles-based author and television writer, she'd tell you that she's the child of the single greatest smoker in all of Texas history, her father. His grilled meats were central to her family's Juneteenth. Ms. Locke said they would usually join community celebrations at Herman Park or McGregor Park in Houston, where dozens of people would grab tables and party to music, the Humidors, Mays, Johnny Taylor. It was literally just a feeling of life and closeness and love, Ms. Locke, 46, said. I don't remember people articulating, hey, this is Freedom Day. The freedom was simply expressed in the right to be with the people that you love. And Veronica Chambers writes, Juneteenth is an invitation to build the world you want to live in. And this is what's right on the cover of that section. Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York signed an executive order on Wednesday making Juneteenth a holiday for state employees. The same goes for tech companies like Twitter and even where I work at the New York Times. This year, Juneteenth, a holiday that celebrates the arrival of the news of emancipation from slavery, seems to be a bigger deal across the nation. But there's a conversation I've been having with my friends. Is celebrating this holiday enough to begin to fix all that's broken? And one tick further, is the national embrace of what has been known as the African American Independence Day a dangerous idea? Some people wonder, if we sip our traditional red drinks as we socially distance on screens and porches, will we be lulled into feeling more free than we really are? Sadia Hartman, the author of Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, and a 2019 MacArthur Genius Grant winner, whose work explores the afterlife of slavery in modern American society, said, how to live a free life, how can one live, is the pressing question for Black folks in the wake of slavery's formal end. Ms. Hartman said that imagining a freer life and a more just society has been the purpose of generations of Black people since the days of Reconstruction. Recently, I heard Angela Davis talk about the radical imagination, Ms. Hartman said, and a fundamental requirement is believing that the world you want to come into existence can happen. I think that is how Black folks have engaged with and invested in and articulated freedom as an ideal and as an everyday practice. I couldn't agree more, writes Veronica Chambers. As someone who has celebrated Juneteenth for a long time, I think we need it now, not in lieu of freedom, justice, and equality that we are still fighting for, but in addition, because we have been fighting for so very long. An elemental sermon embedded into the history and lore of Juneteenth has always been one of hope. The gifts of the holiday are the moments of connection, renewal, and joy for a people who have had to endure so much for so long. To me, Juneteenth matters because it says, keep going. The future you want is coming. And with Juneteenth behind us and the 4th of July ahead of us, we have the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, a covenant among American patriots to sever the colonial bonds that were tying them to the British Crown, a proclamation of equality, of life, of liberty, a proclamation undermined from its inception by the inequalities and oppressions lived and promoted by the founding fathers themselves, many of whom were slaveholders, who lived on land belonging to the Native Americans, who assumed that only men, white men, counted as equals. The religious freedom sought by the Pilgrims was for themselves only, not a principle of tolerance. Here is half a page extracted from a well-researched novel about the Plymouth colony, Beheld by Tara Shea Nesbitt. And I talked about this book the other night, and it actually discusses some of our, the ancestors of some of the people here. The narrator is Alice Bradford. She is the second wife of Governor William Bradford, and she describes an exchange of letters between her husband and their pastor, John Robinson, who was still in Holland. I've left out the bloody and shameful details. She writes, "My husband sent good news to Leyden along with the invitation yet again for our pastor John Robinson to join us. In an earlier letter, Robinson had inquired about the Indians. Now my husband had good news. By the good providence of God, we killed 7 of the chief of them." But Pastor Robinson sent his regrets. "He was too much needed in Holland," he said, "but he also sent admonishments. Oh, how happy it would have been if you had instead converted some. Where blood has once begun to be shed, it is seldom staunched for a long time after. You will say they deserved it, but it is a thing more glorious in men's eyes than pleasing to God, to be a terror to poor barbarous people. Once there is bloodshed, there will be more." Pastor Robinson also warned of Standish, that's Miles Standish, the soldier who led that expedition, who happened to be extremely short. Hexout's taunt of Standish's stature was hardly a cause for murder, Robinson said. Standish's problem, according to Robinson, was pride and self-love. I did not disagree. A little later on, she reports, "On my first 25th of December in Plymouth, instead of building the palisade like the rest of the men, the strangers, these were the non-Puritans, mostly indentured servants, they said it was against their conscience to work on the Lord's day. By noon, the strangers were out in the grass, playing stool ball, drinking beer to excess and laughing as we worked. By early afternoon, William, that is Bradford, stepped down from his ladder and marched over to them and grabbed every bat that he could reach. He shook them and he threw them, and one landed near a baby in a bassinet, and the baby screamed." And Dave will read the words.
"This is not the time for leisure. I'm sorry, but it is against my conscience that some should work while others play the devil's games. No more revelry or gaming as we work. If Christmas is so important to you, stay in your houses."
This gives you a hint of the intolerance and injustice and violence embedded in our colonial past. But despite these deep flaws, the arriving Europeans were taking baby steps towards freedom, towards a vision of society based on freedom. So our final reading this evening will be the beginning and the end of the Declaration of Independence, inspiring and aspirational words.
The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, But among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness.
And then at the end it says, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Dave will play another hymn, O Freedom. Thank you, Dave. For meditation this evening, I am humbled to remind you of this famous poem of Langston Hughes. Its words convey the aspirations of our founders and the distance between those hopes and the reality for so many of people living here today. Here are excerpts from Let America Be America Again. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be the great strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme that any man crushed by one above. It never was America to me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never yet has been, and yet must be, this land where every man is free, this land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain must bring back our mighty dream again. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Well, our third principle speaks of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. I wonder what freedom means to you. Is requiring masks a breach of freedom? Is refusing to wear a mask a breach of the freedom of others to go out in public? Is the aggressive display of automatic weapons an expression of freedom or a breach of the freedom of peaceable citizens? Does militaristic policing protect our lives or diminish the freedom of Americans and African Americans to do ordinary things? What do you think? What is freedom here and now?
We were talking tonight when we were on our walk, and I was talking to Chris about like loving your neighbor and how I just couldn't wrap my mind around, especially people who are very religious, refusing to wear a mask. Because, I mean, it's not like really like pulling out a gun and shooting someone, but when you wear a mask, you're making a statement that you're doing it to protect other people, and that's loving your neighbor. So freedom is important, but sorry to answer a different question, but that's just what's been on my mind all day today.
It really is a spectrum.
like everything else, every time something comes up like this, the word balance comes to mind. Balance is sort of everything. It's a balance between the rights of the community and the rights of the individual. And so it's finding that balance. And different people have different ways they balance it, but both have to be considered.
I had a conversation once in a coffee hour with a parishioner, and this was way back in the 90s. And his view was that, well, his circle of care and concern was him, his family, maybe the people on his block, possibly the people in his neighborhood or the region he lived in. But he had no sense of connection or obligation to the wider society. I wonder if he still feels that way as it's become clearer and clearer that what happens on one side of the world affects us all.
Yeah, I think, I feel similarly in the sense that I feel closest and most protected towards the people I'm closest to, obviously my family. And so as the circle gets wider, my concern gets less, but I think it doesn't go to zero. And I remember what Marcus Aurelius said, one of my favorite characters. He said, as Marcus, speaking about patriotism and one's country, which is a pretty wide circle, but I'll start with that. He said, as Marcus Aurelius, I'm a citizen of Rome. As a man, I'm a citizen of the world. So I think, both have to be weighed. I don't think it's realistic, given human beings, to feel equal concern for people very distant from you, from relative to the people you're close to. It's kind of unfortunate, but I think that's human nature.
Right. Well, I mean, we learned that evolutionarily, creatures will protect those that they share genes with.
Right.
But it's also true that because of all the modern things that are happening, technology and transportation and so on, that something that happens in China can affect us tomorrow in a big way.
Really?
And
No.
if we don't care what happens to people on the other side of the world, it could affect people we share genes with.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, it's the self-interest associated with being concerned with people on the other side of the world is growing with the modern means of communication and movement of all sorts of things.
And as Rupi pointed out, wearing a mask is an act of kindness. And when you say balance, you're balancing the convenience of the mask wearer with the life of the person that they run into. It's an odd way to balance. It's not the actual life, it's some percentage of risk to that life.
I mean, but it's not even hurting the person who wears it. It's just inconvenient. The governor of South Dakota said that they were going to not require a mask because we're celebrating people's freedom to be able to come out and enjoy the holiday. And that people who weren't comfortable with that could stay home. So, I mean, I would think that freedom to me would be being able to go out to a fireworks display without people hacking and coughing germs on me.
Yes.
But I guess the people who are like protesting for freedom to not wear a mask aren't thinking about it that way.
Well, wasn't it, was it South Dakota that Rachel Maddow said last night? The governor told a particular town that was having a terrible surge that if they required masks, he would withhold COVID funds from them. I mean, it's just crazy. So the mask becomes a symbol of an absolutist freedom.
Yeah, I think the mask thing is I'm pro mask,
Yeah.
but if Trump was pro mask, I'd be anti mask.
You don't have to tell people that.
Okay, it's so important to get rid of that guy that I would almost endorse anything that would hurt him.
But I understand that you don't mean that in a literal sense, because
No,
if he said something that made sense or was good, you would go along with it. Because you're not about to slip into and be seduced by the very worst behavior around us.
I am sometimes seduced by it, but I'm glad you reminded me to resist it.
Well, as your minister, I'm suggesting that although it's difficult for all of us, the spiritual challenge is to hold on to our integrity in the face of people who are behaving badly.
Yeah, that is, that's another thing Marcus, my good buddy Marcus, talked about. That if you, the important thing is, if no matter what happens to you, if you keep your virtue, then you're okay. Something like that. I didn't say it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, back in 9/11, people were saying things like, well, if I don't have this piece of chocolate, then the terrorists win. And it seems to me that if we slip into the mean-spirited behavior of the people who are currently in leadership, then the terrorists win.
Well, yeah, that's it. It's a good way.
So that's why it's a challenge to us. I don't say that I do it or that I can do it all the time or that you must do it, but I say that's a constant spiritual challenge before us, is not to be dragged into that awful behavior.
I think I'm just,
The issue about freedom has been before the Supreme Court lately is the right of women to control their own bodies and to have abortions if they feel that abortion is necessary. And the Supreme Court came out on the side of the women who want that freedom, but with reasoning that is very suspect, because Roberts made it clear that he's against abortion, but because there was an identical case just a few years ago, he felt he had to go along with it. But if there's a case that's slightly different, the right to abortion could be diminished drastically. It could be up to the states. And we'll see.
What's the Latin word for having to go or to being swayed by former decisions? Stereostasis?
Stare decisis.
Yeah, I like Latin.
Let
Say it
I'm
again,
glad you're asking him, not me.
the decision, the decision stands.
Stare,
Say it again. The
it's
word.
no, sorry.
Infinitive.
It's the infinitive of the verb to stand decided.
Okay.
And there was an practically identical case a few years ago, plus other cases that came out in favor of abortion rights. But who knows where that will stand? And the two oldest members of the Supreme Court are both on the liberal side.
Yes,
And
I came home the other day and I saw the Supreme Court issues. It was on the news, and I thought, oh my God, who the oldest member of the Supreme Court who had cancer? I said, oh my God, she didn't die, please. Stay.
RBG.
Ginsburg.
Ginsburg, that's right. She has to keep going.
There
Yeah,
was a Saturday Night Live when she was like, I'm not dead yet. And I think it showed the like Grim Reaper coming for her, and she like punched him and fought him off.
Well,
Carrie, you bring up, there's another balance here. When one is faced with something that evil rises to a level, what evil you could do to respond to it is raised as well.
Well, I agree, and it is a challenge. And Bonhoeffer eventually decided to join a plot to kill Hitler. And Bonhoeffer was a very serious Christian theologian who found that the idea of murder abhorrent. But what I'm saying is a little different, because I think that if we should decide to do something evil in a good cause, we should not also degrade ourselves in the process. So mocking the appearance of the president is not worthy of us.
Yeah.
Arguing against his policies, arguing against his behavior, criticizing his character, those are all good. Those are right things to do. But mocking his inability to walk properly, that's mean-spirited, and that's not what we should do. So if we have to act against him, we do it in a serious and consistent, or way that's consistent with our principles.
Yeah, the way I relate to that is that one sometimes has to fight your enemies physically in war,
Yes.
but
That
you
does
shouldn't
happen.
hate your enemies.
But
That's a
what?
good way of putting it.
You may have to kill your enemies, but you shouldn't hate them.
Well, and so let's see if we can manage that.
Okay.
When I say manage it, I'm not promoting killing anybody, and I'm certainly incapable of it myself. But
But the way to show your love for Mr. Trump is to relieve him of the responsibilities of his office.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Retire.
I've often said that the Trump whisperer ought to say, "You're too good for those people. They don't appreciate you. You should resign and leave them in the lurch. That'll show them." So I think
Yeah.
that would be a suitably respectful way of disburdening him of something he's clearly not up to. Okay, we have a benediction, and then after the chalice extinguishing, Dave will play a Spirit of God descend upon our hearts. The work of freedom is ever drawing us forward. It is not complete until every human being can live in sufficiency and integrity, freed from oppressions of every sort. May we continue to live towards that aspiration. Now we turn a little switch and extinguish the light, but the light of freedom dances yet ahead of us and within us. We draw on its strength as we live to help embody the ideals of our origins.
Let America be America.
Amen.